Hello again, friends. I'm glad you could join me again. So 2 weeks ago, we left off with the conclusion of the Baroque period, 1750. Today, we can move into the classical period. Although we talk about classical music, there is a period of music called the classical period. This runs from 1750 to 1825. And when we have eras of history, it's not as though someone says, I'm going to start a movement today. This is the first day that we're going to call it classical music. Usually something happens. And what happened was Bach dies in 1750. And recall at the time of Bach's death, Bach, although the king of the fugue, had pretty much worn out his welcome with Baroque music. He was old-fashioned by the time that he died. So 1750, this fella named Franz Joseph Haydn bursts onto the scene and becomes very popular. Similar sound in some ways to Baroque music, but also very different. What I opened with today was a piece that was written in 1756. One of the main things that you'll know that is different is the melody is extremely prominent. You recall with Baroque, there was the fugue style was fast and ferocious and a lot of different voices speaking at the same time, a lot of different parts going on. Once we get into classical music, you have a clearly defined melody. Everything else is secondary. That's a new development. Other things that happened, we developed some new instruments and solidified the way that we make other instruments. The harpsichord became a rather prominent instrument. Most people were familiar with the harpsichord by 1750. Our strings, the violin, the viola, the cello, the double bass, those had developed into the instruments that we basically know now. What was added were our brass instruments. First came trombones, because when you think of a trumpet, you think of the valves, and it's not that we didn't want to make a valved trumpet, we just didn't know how to do it. We hadn't figured that out yet. So most of the brass at the time was still trombone oriented. Now we had large trombones, bass trombones, tenor trombones. We had smaller alto trombones. We had a soprano trombone, which was trumpet size, but still played as a trombone. Also, the woodwinds developed ways to be played chromatically. Remember, we talked about the fife, the precursor to the flute, and flutes pretty much played in whatever key they were made in. And if you wanted a different key, you had to get another flute to play. So we got chromatic possibilities. What this did was it opened the door to composition for all instruments, which led to chamber music. Recall, chamber music is music that is played in rooms, chambers. So you would have string quartets, you would have trios, piano, cello, violin. You would have solo instruments with harpsichord accompaniment. What it also led to was the symphony. Franz Joseph Haydn, Austrian composer, he was kind of sequestered in Austria. He served as a court musician. He was the Kapellmeister, which is the music director. He directed all of the music for his patron. He composed, he played, he conducted, he hired the musicians, he made sure that everything music happened. And this isolation allowed him to compose pretty much with abandon. He had no one to compare himself to, so he had liberty to compose however he wanted to compose. One reason that classical music developed separate from the German music. So Haydn began to compose chamber music, and he began to compose symphonies. And he is known in the world of musicians as the father of chamber music and the father of the symphony. He wrote almost 100 symphonies, if you can imagine. Now, the symphonies did not last an hour like they do now. They were not quite as long, they were not quite as involved. But an important step happened with Haydn. He said, I'm going to make pieces that are more involved, that are a little longer, and that develop a little more. Because up until then, the organ music, for example, prelude and fugue, most of these pieces were 10 minutes long at the most. That's a very long piece for Baroque music. When you move into classical music, you develop the symphony, which can be 15 minutes long. Some are 30 minutes long, but they consist of several different movements. The first movement in the symphony is a fast, furious movement. The second movement is a slower, more contemplative, melodic movement. And then the third movement is the closing piece, a much stronger movement. So you developed longer, more involved pieces. Haydn was Beethoven's teacher. He was also Mozart's mentor, not necessarily his teacher, because Mozart pretty much was a genius. Really didn't have to learn to compose. He pretty much knew what he was doing from day one. So Haydn was a mentor to Mozart and very important in the Vienna scene and the Austrian scene. We will talk next time a little bit more about Mozart. Until I will close with Haydn, peace to you.